E-L-O-E-J, a little aloha in our day. Spread a little aloha around the world at breakfast with Bob.
Thank you, Poncho Man. Welcome, everybody. Breakfast with Bob, not quite Kona edition. My name is Bob Babbitt, and we're brought to you by Master Spas. SFuels, go longer. Hoka, Form Smart Swim Goggles, Quintana Roo, Zoot, Premium Plus Sports, and of course, our Challenged Athletes Foundation. Today, it's all about SFuels, one of our awesome sponsors, and we want to chat with Nicole Phillips, who's the CEO, with Dr. Dan Plews, who's SFuels technical advisor and board member, and our founder, Mr. Leighton Phillips. Leighton, let's start with you. Talk a little bit about why you felt there was a need for a new nutrition company in endurance sports.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Good to see you. Thanks for having us on. I guess we started in ultra running and felt like just the products there that were being used were like generating a whole bunch of gut problems and frankly slow recovery issues as you ramp the volume. And I think we thought it was just us, but then when we looked at the sports science research, we found out it was actually a fairly broad issue. And my training was in naturopathic medicine. I felt like we could do better. So we started working with some labs and, seeking to drive some innovation. And obviously we can talk more about that, but that was the trigger of it, Bob.
And Nicole, for you, with your background, 15 years with Nestle, when Leighton, was it you guys coming up with the idea together? Was Leighton coming to you saying, hey, I've got this idea for product?
Yes, he basically said, I've got this idea. And then we went through these, I've got to say they were hideous iterations in our kitchen. Thankfully, things have got a lot better, and we now have edible product that actually tastes really good. And I guess, some of my background, while I never worked on the development side, but more on the marketing and sales side, I could add a little bit of insight about what would and wouldn't sell in the market. So that probably saved everyone a whole lot of pain.
I was going to say, because you've seen so many different products over the years, from Power Bar and things like that have come out of basically the same type of situation. I think with Power Bar, Brian Maxwell was trying to find something he could eat and try to run a 2:12 marathon at the same time. And his wife developed the product. So you guys are sort of the same type of thing, where he'd say, hey, I got an idea. And you're going, well, I've got a little background in product. It's nice to come out with a nutrition product, but if it doesn't taste good, you can forget about it.
Right, exactly.
We went through a bunch of seasons too, Bob. We thought we had the product nailed, and you go through a summer and then you enter into a winter and the consistency of the product would change. So we literally went through 2 full seasons to really get the product right. And we did the blood fasting, glucose testing to make sure that it reacted well in the body and things like this. So that was really the basis of the initial company. We registered Spike Free. That's the SF and SFuels. That was the registered name of the first company. And then we got some marketing advice that we can do better than that. So that's the background.
So how did you get Dan involved? You had a guy who holds the amateur record at Kona, 8:24:36 and 2:50:50. That's what impresses me the most. 2:50:56, the 5th fastest overall marathon on a day, including all the pros. How did you get to Dan and then show him enough about the product for him to come on board?
Yeah, I think Dan, it was early 2018. He reached out to us, and Dan was doing all this research in his own labs on purely metabolic science and fat oxidation efficiency and things like that. But he came to us on the basis that couldn't find a lot of products. He stumbled across what we were just starting with. And really, between Dan and us, we co-developed our first train product, our fluid fueling product for training. And we actually went into, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we went into the 2018 race, right, with just the train product.
Well, I think just the train products, and there was no bars at the time.
Right.
So the story, I think it was actually late 2017, but the way it unfolded, I don't know whether, I always remember it better than you, Leighton, but age is on my side on that one, I guess. But I actually wrote a blog. So I was following a lower carb diet, and I was training Jan van Berkel at the time, and I know you've interviewed Jan van Berkel.
Oh, yeah.
So I put Jan on a lower carb diet, and because we did a lot of scans, we did like DEXA scans, which measures your body fat, but it also measures your visceral fat. So visceral fat is fat basically around the organs, and that is the fat. If you want to be a healthy athlete or a healthy person, that's the fat that you've got to be the most aware of, because that's the most important fat that you really want to have low. I mean, if you've got a higher body fat and a low visceral fat, that's better. If you've got low body fat and high visceral fat, that's not very good. But anyway, long story short, Jan was obviously training for many years on a high carb diet. He came to me primarily for the diet. I ended up coaching him, and I wrote a blog after we did the low carb diet where we showed that we reduced his visceral fat by 45%.
Wow.
So, you're talking, you got an athlete, and this is kind of where I think Leighton read this blog and kind of like where we met, I guess, is that he saw we were both speaking the same language. And then yeah, I think originally he got in touch with some educational content, but then basically I was a sponsored athlete for the first ever time, and that was it really. Yeah.
And we went, Bob, to Kona really as like that was going to be the proof point to work out whether, aside from taste and texture and some of the more healthy aspects of this product with gut and all that, but you could actually perform with it. So 2018 was the make or break, test case, if you will, to work out whether we had something,
Well, make or break, and the guy goes 824 and wins the overall amateur. So obviously make is sort of the term. So
no pressure, eh, Bob? No pressure.
No pressure on you there, Dan. Hey, if you don't do well, our product's gone. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you think about our sport, I mean, we're talking decades of carbohydrates. We always had a carbo party on Thursday night leading into the Ironman. I remember, eating pierogies, just as many as humanly possible. You need that, right? You need to have the carbohydrates to get through these races. When did you realize, okay, maybe we're heading in the wrong direction with this?
Yeah, I mean, I started looking at lower carb diets in 2012, and it was after I read a lot of Tim Noakes' work, who started to talk about the area. He wrote The Law of Running, and he kind of like restarted talking about how maybe we've got this wrong. And I think all these things start with trying it yourself. And at the time I was trying it with my friend who was a professor in physiology as well. So I was doctor in physiology, working with my friend who's a professor in physiology, and we we kind of experimented ourselves, and the results were astounding. We found we could recover better. We found that our performance was increasing. And mainly just not hitting the wall. I think when it comes to long distance triathlon, there's three main kind of pinch points or main barriers that most of the people come up against. One is that they get gastrointestinal distress when they're racing. Yes. Number two is they inevitably hit the wall towards the end of the bike or the back end of the marathon. It happens all the time.
Yep.
And number three is that often they find that they can't really maintain a good race weight all year round, and they have to really limit their food intake and the calories to achieve it. And basically by using a lower carb approach and using the right fuel, right time approach that we're going to talk about, you can actually you can alleviate all those things quite easily. So yeah, and then I think we started like more ketogenic, but I think we've evolved a little bit since then, whereas we're kind of more now lower carb, which would be 150 grams, 130 grams per day, and using more of a periodized carbohydrate approach, which I've actually gone in to do a lot of research myself. Like one of my PhD students we now published quite a few papers on the matter. So yeah, it's been a full on evolution, if you like.
How did you change in terms of what you used on race day compared to what you'd used previously?
Yeah, so that really didn't change very much, because I still believe that when it comes to racing, I think when you hear someone talk about low carb, people say, "Oh, you think carbohydrates are bad." I like to think of it the opposite: is that a lower carb diet, it means that carbs are still important, But with a lower carb diet, you increase your fat oxidation, you use the right fuel, right time approach, because at the end of the day, you want to preserve your endogenous, your internal carbohydrate stores during racing. So during racing, I still take on carbs, probably less than a lot of people would normally, which is for me would be around 50 to 60 grams per hour. Like you hear a lot of the pros now taking up to 120 grams per hour, which I think is absolute madness. And there's actually no scientific evidence to suggest it's any good either. Right. But yeah, I still take carbs during race day, but because my fat oxidation's so good, I can take a little bit less, and I'm not required to also take fructose to up my carb requirement to up to 90 grams per hour, which I would have to take fructose if I wanted to achieve that, because the oxidation rate would be a little bit higher.
One interesting area there, Dan, too, was Bob, we did some research that looked at prior to the start of race day, what good practice and bad practices in the spirit of either doing things that would blunten fat oxidation in the race, or things that you would do that would allow fat oxidation to happen efficiently as you obviously use the carbohydrate like Dan has just talked to. And you know, he produced a really interesting paper that showed the typical traditional method of pre-race, and like you said, the night before, if you will, loading carbohydrate, can have a blunting effect on that fat oxidation. And the upshot of all that is that you then become in the race more dependent on carbohydrates. So as Dan said, the amount of carbohydrate that's being used by athletes that be trained in low carb is certainly lower than your classic traditional high carb athlete.
So and I think the really important thing just to touch on is this lower carb living is just so fundamental to your recovery, and that is really one of the areas where SFuels was born, because Leighton was doing those ultra marathons at the time, and he'd finish 100 miles and it'd take him 3 or 4 days on the couch and a box of ibuprofen to kind of get going again. And once he went low carb and we really started working on this whole range of products, I mean, he would come in at 1 and 2 a.m. in the morning, and he'd be up helping around the house at 8 and 9 a.m. And so obviously that was a huge benefit for me. And that's probably when we decided we really had something.
Rather than him just being a lump on the couch for 4 days.
Right, exactly.
So for you, Nicole, you're the growing the digital, the brick and mortar, customer satisfaction, all the rest of that. How when you launch a product, you're starting from ground zero. So how did you plant those seeds, social media wise, et cetera, to get people to actually try the product?
Well, in the beginning, actually, we believed really strongly in sampling. We had done a lot of iteration of our product behind the scenes, and we knew we had a strong taste profile, good mouthfeel. So we gave a lot of product away in the early days, and just got it out there in the hands of people. And then the other thing we wanted to do was not just market a product; we wanted to build a community. And we've spent a lot of time on education, sharing information that's not just about the product, but certainly using Dan as well. And at times Dave Scott, just getting the information out there about the benefits of a healthier lifestyle, and being able to go longer in the things you really enjoy. So I think the recipe ideas, the community has been a real strong point, and we get a lot of feedback about being very authentic, and our last 700 product reviews have been 4 and 5 stars. So I think we built our foundation on a high quality product. We haven't cut costs. Our products are at the upper end of the market, but we use good, clean, high quality ingredients, and that's delivering for us.
Well, and in the sport of triathlon, it's funny because a lot of times in individual sports, swimmers, cyclists, runners, they're a little hesitant to try new stuff. For the triathlete, because they're balancing 3 sports, they're balancing a family, they're balancing nutrition, they're balancing weight training. They're going to be, I always look at it as the early adopters. They're the ones who are going to come in and say, I'll try something, and if it works, I'll keep using it. Did you find that, Nicole, that with the triathletes, you found a pretty willing audience to give this a try?
Yes, most definitely. So as Leighton mentioned, we started in the ultra marathon market, and it was really slow. They love lots and lots of information, but it takes a long time to make a good customer out of them. Whereas in the triathlon group, I guess they're used to spending large sums of money on bikes and wheels and handlebars,
Yes.
and so nutrition, when they understand the role that it can play in the overall race plan, they're willing to be an early adopter, I should say. So we've had good success in the triathlon market.
Yeah, and Leighton, we first met at 70.3, I'm sorry, at Ironman Worlds in St. George. Yep. And I'm guessing, it's funny because you think, okay, it's the week of the race, and it's a really important race for a lot of folks, but you'll still find people who will, hey, if they're convinced the product is going to be good for them, they'll use it, even though they don't have a backlog of weeks and months and years of training with the product. Did you find that, Leighton?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, we were just straight sampling, and it's fine for people to take a small cup or something, or a bite of a bar or what have you. But we absolutely had athletes that were approaching us that on Thursday were asking about using the product on Saturday. Or honestly, we were kind of a little nervous about that, but it happens. It does happen for sure.
So Dan, you go from setting the course record at Ironman, and how did you guys work together after that to, obviously you want to amplify the awareness of the product because you just had great success using it?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, there was still a few gaps in the portfolio, and that was quite obvious because, as Leighton mentioned, we really only had the train products, and we started off with the bars, and the bars were great. They had a very high chew effect from memory. There was a bit of an endurance in your jaw as well as everything else. But yeah, so really, as mentioned, I was still using a higher carb approach when racing. So there was a definite gap there that we needed a higher carb product. So the Race Plus came out, and since then, we've seen, okay, we need a more of a gel format. The Race Plus gel has come out. But then, through the research that we've done, and we just published a meta-analysis that showed this, it says, that more important than what you're doing during exercise to improve your fat oxidation is actually what you're eating around exercise. So then the whole lifestyle range becomes really, really important. We've got the keto, the Keto 3, which is the breakfast cereal, the Life powder that just basically makes cooking and a low carb lifestyle more interesting, a lot easier, especially with young kids. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and actually SFuels is hot property in my house. I actually have to fend it off them. Like the bars, if they see me eating one, they're sat down right next to me and like, daddy bar. And we make the train into popsicles for them. They absolutely love it. I call the SFuels Live pomegranate the blueberry drink. They come if they've been down at the beach and they have it. So these are all things that just make life a little bit easier, and that's where the life range comes into it, the active lifestyle, because being able to live that way is just as important as being able to train in the way. So that's where the next step of the portfolio came in as well, and it's also backed up by the research.
So Nicole, that opens up a great point in terms of lifestyle. Obviously, with your background with Nestle, to be able to say, okay, we've got a product that's not just for your hardcore triathlete, your hardcore ultra runner, but this is something the whole family can be using.
Exactly. And I guess that's one of the biggest challenges is when the athlete in your family starts following a low carb diet, you spend hours in the supermarket reading labels and trying to find things that are appropriate, while catering to the taste of your kids. And it was very challenging when we started down that route. But now we've got a great mix of products that can be used by everybody in the household, and your normal recipes, as long as you're using lots of fresh, high quality grocery ingredients, then you can add things like the transform powder and up the fat content, give things like your salad dressings, etc., a hint of sweetness, and you don't need to have 10 bags of different ingredients in your pantry. You can have one bag that's mixed it all together for you. So that's definitely where we see a lot of opportunity in the future is the active lifestyle community. But we wanted to prove our credentials in the performance athlete sector first, and a lot of people aspire to be athletes in their everyday life, and that's what we're trying to cater to.
So Leighton, it's we all know starting a new company is not the easiest thing in the world. What have been the biggest challenges getting SFuels off the ground and getting it to the point you're at now?
there's 30 years of mindset around the high carb living. I mean, it's very
Right.
entrenched, a big industry behind that, Bob. And on the surface, logically, it kind of sounds right, whereby, okay, I'm going to go and run for 2 hours. Clearly, I need a lot of carbohydrate to get there. And I think education has been the thing which, with partnership with Dan and IQ, his company, we've just, I think, broken the back of some of that, where as people get into the education and really understand what is going on in the body and what you do need and don't need, we've really had some breakthroughs. But I think that's been the challenge. And I think, again, there's big companies behind the sugar industry. So my anticipation is they'll continue to market that story for a long time yet.
And what's the next goal? What are the plans moving forward?
Well, our next goal really is, we feel like we've got a strong product portfolio, but we've still got lots of ideas in our back pocket, and we want to bring them to market, but we need a core product range that's working. We've just moved into a bigger facility, which is great. We've been bootstrapping this business for the past 4 years as a fully self-funded startup. So lots of challenges there, but things are looking good, and we have options on bigger space. So we're kind of setting ourselves up for growth. The last thing we want to do is grow exponentially and then disappoint our customers.
Yep.
So we're trying to get all those things in place before we make a big push out into the lifestyle market, and they're coming together quite nicely.
So Dan, as a coach who works with a lot of different athletes, what has been the reception? When athletes, if you're coaching an athlete, a lot of them have had success, and when you're coming to them saying, let's sort of rip up what you're doing and do something totally different, what has been that response from those athletes?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, as things have evolved, I think, now, it's not just about adopting a low carb diet. We now have more of this right fuel, right time approach. And, I coach 4 top level pros, and only one of them really follows a high carb diet. I'm sorry, a low carb diet. But, the other 3, we take more of a right fuel, right time approach. So they kind of follow the diet they've always followed, but I just kind of petition nutrition around the training. So I make sure, like, if they've got a long bike ride and I want to make sure they're optimizing their fat oxidation, I'll say, okay, no carbohydrates the night before, just protein in the morning, and then we'll use kind of more of the life product during the longer ride to kind of promote fat oxidation. And it's the same with the more of the high intensity work, making sure that they've got carbohydrates and using the Race Plus for that. So it's not just about going low carb, it's about just the same way you structure a training program and you periodize high and low intensity. We use the same approach with nutrition. We don't just go blanket approach that it's carbohydrates for every single type of session that you do. We try and get the most bang for your buck. It's all about adaptation, and it's all about physiology at the end of the day. And you can specifically target different areas of physiology when you manipulate nutrition. So, we know, for example, if you are in more of a glycogen depleted state and you're doing more of like an Ironman effort, you can seriously upregulate some molecular sensors that will really enhance your adaptation to that session. So there's so many things that you can do with it, and it is a real science. But I think it's something that athletes overlook, and as long as you can explain the why, they'll generally do the what. So it's not fortunately I can generally explain the why, so it's not too hard to convince them most of the time.
How much credit do you give to your nutrition and your fueling in terms of your race in 2018? Because when I look at that race, 824 would have won a lot of Ironman races overall, right? Actually, Dave Scott's course record was 828. Before Mark Allen broke that.
Someone once gave me the stat, and Dave Scott's obviously part of SFuels, and he might be watching this back, but
yes,
it's faster than all of his wins. So there you go.
It's a little slower than his 810 when he took second.
Yeah, I know. He still wins, really.
Dan, it may be just worth talking a little bit about that day. We were all there in Kona, obviously, but just giving some context to, once you had your fat oxidation optimized, when you got to the run, the amount of carbohydrate you use. So even though you say you're still using carbohydrate, I think what's really interesting at a run a 250 marathon, you actually didn't use a lot of carbohydrate.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, first I'll answer the question: how much do I attribute to my diet? A lot, and I can't say how much, but you know, I went to Kona in 2015, and I went 9:08. You know, and over those, you know, and I kept on honing the diet, but even then I was still on a lower carb diet. But I think it was a gift that keeps on giving, and before that, I never thought I would be as fast as I never thought I'd ever do a time like that. I didn't think I was that good, but it changed me as an athlete completely. You know, I went from being just a average age group. I wouldn't always even win my age group, but to suddenly then being very, very good. So it changed my training. It changed that race, and inevitably that changed my life actually, because before that, I was, you know, as an academic, I had a PhD, I'd published papers. I was coaching a lot of pros. I was coaching Jan van Berkel. I'd coached Caroline Steffen. I'd coached Tim van Berkel. So I was doing a lot of coaching, but I was actually not recognized until I actually did that. No one actually knew who I was. So it was, so yeah, I attribute a lot to it. But to answer Leighton's point, so yeah, I did have 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrates on the bike, but during the run, I took 60 grams in total. For the entire marathon. 2 gels is all I had. So and then the rest, I mean, I grabbed fluid and stuff at the aid stations, so there might have been a few carbs in that, but I grabbed two gels. So it was actually probably less than 60, because you don't take a whole gel right when you squeeze it. Right. You take a little bit less than that. So
Bob, we had 2 other data points to your question. One was Matt Kerr, when he started working with Dan back in 2018, his power on the bike he's optimized his highest level of fat oxidation, 135 watts, and he was burning about a half of a gram a minute of fat. Well, last year, which, as you know, he then this year set the, you know, became an Ironman age group world champion. He's now 300 watts, and he's burning triple the amount of fat at that higher wattage. So to answer your question on what's possible, that's one data point. And the other one would be in 2020, in the middle of COVID, when all the racing got shut down, Zach Bitter came to us and said, I was trying to go and break my 100-mile world record. And because the racing got shut down, I can't do it. Let's go and do it on the treadmill. So 100-mile record on the treadmill. Well, he did 4 back-to-back marathons, sub 3 hours to break the world record, 11 hours 9. And if you look at his consumption of carbohydrate, I think it was 13 serves, which is, what's that, about 500 grams for 11 hours of carbohydrates. So there's a few data points for you.
Yeah. And lastly, I just add to that, I had 2 points actually.
Yeah.
One is just in 2018, I ran some stats on the pacing of the marathon, and you know, you can look at the splits of the pros, and you know, at the start I was running in 12th place, and then you know, gradually through the race, the only difference was I just didn't slow down at all. And in the last mile, it's only Patrick Langry who ran faster than me in the last mile of that run, and obviously he had the fastest run of the day, because I was, you know, fat oxidation, I just didn't slow down as much. But at the same time, you know, like I go back to my further point, we talk about Matt and we talk about Zach. I also coached Chelsea Sodaro, and we just launched a blog last week that showed her fat oxidation change without even adopting a low carbohydrate lifestyle. She's not changed the diet at all. The only change that was happened is using a right fuel, right time approach, which means that she's restricting carbohydrates during the lower intensity sessions and adding them in for the higher intensity sessions. And it's not just a case of, you know, just full on carb all the time. And if you plot the graphs, you can actually plot like carbohydrate, you know, you can increase work intensity, so increasing power output. When she first started working with me, there wasn't one point in time ever when she would burn predominantly carbohydrates, predominantly fats over carbohydrates. So even from the start, she would burn predominantly carbohydrates, but then just for doing the right fuel, right time approach, now that crossover point isn't till nearly 200 watts. So, and she's very small, right? So just massive differences without even taking, you know, a low carb approach.
When you say right fuel, right time, what do you mean by that?
So when I say that, it's like thinking about the type of work that you're doing in your training, and then applying the fuel to that work. So if it's generally very simply, if it's a low intensity workout, you restrict carbohydrates. If it's a higher intensity workout, you give carbohydrates. So like if it's a long ride that's 4 hours, level 2, low intensity, then you could just use something like the Train product. But if it was a session where you're doing, say, 6 by 8 minutes at, you know, close to your threshold power, level 4, near your anaerobic threshold, then you would start to add in carbohydrates. So I mean, that's a very simplistic approach, but that's kind of the right fuel, right time approach. Yeah,
love that. So Leighton, you guys have come a long way, and so you'll have some of your athletes racing in Kona.
Yeah, we have about a dozen ambassadors there. Bob, I'm sure there's a bunch of other customers that are not ambassadors as such, but and then Dan's like we run a joint racing team between Dan's organization, EndurIQ, and SFuels. All in all, there's probably 40, 50 athletes there in Kona. And we've got one athlete that's shooting for Dan's record, so the tension's on, you know.
I love that. Well, thank you guys for taking so much time to chat. Congratulations on where SFuels started and where you're at. Really appreciate the support, and more importantly, it's great to see athletes having success. I'm sure that's the happy spot for all you guys when an athlete comes to you and says, "I was always having gut issues, and I just had the best race I ever had by using your product."
Yeah,
for sure. Spot on.
I actually had an email like that today. To be fair.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, you know, he was in my squad. You know, he's been and you know, I just told him to adopt more of the lower carb. He was already lower carb. Told him to literally half his race day nutrition, and he had the best race he's ever had. You know, and all of his good issues are suddenly resolved. And you know, it seems so obvious, but he was very thankful. So that's all.
Love it. Well, Leighton Phillips, Dr. Dan Plews, Nicole Phillips, thank you so much for taking time, and we'll see a number of you guys in Kona.
Thanks again, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Again, Breakfast with Bob, Not Quite Kona edition. Take care, everybody. We'll be seeing you in Kona very soon. Bye.